One of the most common lies told about the Frankfurt School is that they hated Western culture, or wanted to destroy it, or something along those lines. The truth is quite the opposite. Adorno, who I will be focusing on in this video, not only respectfully engaged with the history and classics of Western art, he was concerned precisely with its destruction by the mechanisms of capital. He was concerned with what happens when the profit motive completely overtakes the cultural life of society, culminating in what he and Horkheimer called the culture industry. The culture industry is what happens when, in a society of developed capitalism, cultural artifacts start becoming produced according to a standardizing plan, carefully planned to be as profitable as possible, like a mass-producing factory. In fact, as the great channel Three Arrows once pointed out, Adorno's criticism of contemporary culture seems more similar to Peter Joseph Watson's criticism of pop culture than anything that right-wingers characterize as cultural Marxism.
Popular music is dumber, duller, and more homogenized than ever before. Popular music is dumber, duller, and more homogenized than ever before.
This is not, of course, to deny that Adorno's criticism is way more sophisticated than Watson's and has more explanatory power. After all, what makes more sense? That cultural products are becoming increasingly standardized because there is a worldwide cultural Marxist conspiracy in which a group of villains is actively trying to make culture worse? Or that cultural products are becoming increasingly standardized because when the profit motive dictates production, industries will produce that which has already been proven to sell. For Adorno, a pursuit of freedom in society is inseparable from a pursuit of enlightenment in culture. So, having that in mind, we could ask the question, what would Adorno say about our society, considering we dedicated $50 million to the making of a movie like this? What's interesting is that the Emoji movie exemplifies the logic of the culture industry both internally, in the plot of the film, and externally, in the production process of the film. What is the world that the emojis live in, if not a world entirely under the grasp of the culture industry? Just take a look at it and see how closely it is described by Adorno. Just as the occupants of the city centers are uniformly summoned there for purposes of work and leisure, as producers and consumers, so the living cells crystallize into homogeneous, well-organized complexes. In the dystopian world of Textopolis, everyone is reduced to their function in the production process, not being allowed to express anything that doesn't fit in completely and strictly to the industrial plan. It reminds one of what Marx said about the capitalist division of labor, where people with diverse interests and capabilities are forced to do one single monotonous task over and over, being horrifically reduced to just one part of themselves. As Marx says, the capitalist division of labor converts the laborer into a crippled monstrosity by forcing his detailed dexterity at the expense of a world of productive capabilities and instincts. The individual himself is made the automatic motor of a fractional operation. And Engels further adds, the machinery of modern industry degrades the laborer from a machine to the mere appendage of a machine. For Adorno, genuine art has a kind of autonomy and spontaneity to it, but the culture industry tries to suppress this, churning everything out according to a totalizing plan. Each piece of mass media is carefully planned and constructed out of familiar cultural components to be as profitable as possible. There is no space left for spontaneity, nothing that escapes the plan of the production process. In the movie, the emoji Gene represents the spontaneity that the culture industry suppresses. Although according to his birth and social status, he is meant to be a meh emoji, he has a certain spontaneity that leads him to make all kinds of expressions. The culture industry in this case is of course the entire emoji-producing apparatus. Gene is what Adorno calls the non-identical, something spontaneous that cannot be organized or institutionalized. However, due to the way in which our self-worth is often determined by our position in the production process under capitalism, Gene wants to leave Textopolis to find a hacker that would make him a properly functioning meh emoji. This could be likened to the therapy and prescription drugs that people utilize to get through the workday, at the expense of being able to express the full range of their emotions. On the other hand, the character Jailbreak is someone who used to be a princess emoji, but in trying to escape the clutches of the industry, left and became a hacker. She represents the individual rebellion of the non-identical, an attempt to push beyond, to escape the production process. It would seem that the movie is then taking the side of spontaneity rather than the side of the culture industry, but it's remarkable just how explicitly it rejects this initial assumption. Towards the end of the movie, Jailbreak only saves the day by reverting back into a princess. She gives up her dream of being an independent hacker and goes back to her job in the emoji factory. Gene also returns to his job as an emoji and is now allowed to show different expressions, but only because they have been incorporated into the industrial plan. His spontaneity is now neutralized and fully incorporated into the system, stripped away of its revolutionary potential. So what seems at first to be a story of individual resistance ends up being a lesson about how all elements of resistance will be incorporated back into the industry itself. Exactly as Adorno says, in the culture industry, human beings get into trouble only so that they can be rescued unharmed. And then, in empty harmony, they are reconciled with the general, whose demands they had experienced at the outset as irreconcilable with their interests. The perennial middle-class conflict between individuality and society has been reduced to a dim memory, and the message is invariably that of identification with the status quo. The outcome of conflict is pre-established, and all conflicts are mere sham. Society is always the winner, and the individual is only a puppet manipulated through social rules. The Emoji Movie makes this explicitly clear, as the social rules one is controlled by is literally part of an emoji's very being. And so Jailbreak succeeds by becoming a princess emoji again, and High Five succeeds by doing what a hand does, pushing buttons. Now let's zoom out from the internal logic of the film and look at it from the outside. Adorno states that as the demand for the marketability of art becomes total, a shift in the inner economic composition of cultural commodities is becoming apparent. What might be called use value in the reception of cultural assets is being replaced by exchange value. And further, culture is a paradoxical commodity. So completely is it subject to the law of exchange that it is no longer exchanged. It is so blindly consumed in use that it can no longer be used. Therefore, it amalgamates with advertising. The more meaningless the latter seems to be under a monopoly, the more omnipotent it becomes. Adorno is here identifying a shift in the very nature of cultural commodities as they are produced by the culture industry. Previously, media derived its exchange value, what it can be exchanged for, from its use value, that is, its usefulness. But according to Adorno, exchange value has completely overtaken use value. This can be seen today in several ways. Think, for example, of product placement and websites like BuzzFeed, where a service becomes indistinguishable from advertisement. We can see it in the Emoji Movie itself. After all, let's admit it, this movie has no use value. No one really even wanted it, everyone knew it would be bad. Yet such a movie can still come into existence not because of the use value it serves, but because of its obedience to exchange value. For instance, the product placement it utilizes. It's completely stuffed with product placement that's incorporated into the plot itself. Crackle, WeChat, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Dropbox, Candy Crush, and Just Dance, to name some. Exactly as Adorno says, cultural products amalgamate with advertising. The function that the culture industry serves in the general capitalist economy, besides making profit of course, is to prepare workers for another day of mind-numbing work. Many people coming home from work, already exhausted, no longer have the mental energy to consume challenging or demanding media. And this is one of the reasons why culture becomes so dumbed down. It must be digestible enough to appease already mentally exhausted people. Adorno says, amusement under late capitalism is the prolongation of work. It is sought after as an escape from the mechanized work process, and to recruit strength in order to be able to cope with it again. But at the same time, mechanization has such power over a man's leisure and happiness, and so profoundly determines the manufacture of amusement goods, that his experiences are inevitably after images of the work process itself. What happens at work, in the factory, or in the office, can only be escaped from by approximation to it in one's leisure time. Adorno is here referring to how our leisure time, just like our working hours, becomes repetitive, monotonous, and mechanized. but often entertainment quite literally becomes like an afterimage of the work process. And this goes into the wider Marxist idea of ideology in general. Take the Flintstones, for example. It is set in prehistoric times radically different than our own, with radically different social structures. Yet it reproduces contemporary capitalist relations of production. You have money, wage labor, the modern nuclear family, the police force, the whole deal. Lately I've been seeing advertisements for a new show called Miracle Workers, where even angels and God in heaven seem to reproduce a capitalist labor process. Now, of course, this doesn't happen because the makers of such media actively intend to enforce the dominant ideology, but it does have the effect of reinforcing this vague feeling that the way our system is organized is in some sense universal and natural. It's a feeling that affects our worldview even when we don't explicitly believe it. And this is precisely the case in the Emoji movie itself. You'd think that if the software elements of an iPhone were sentient, the organization of their societies would be radically different. And yet, in many ways, the Emoji movie reproduces the contemporary entertainment industry, as well as class divisions and a police force. However, while in reality the production process is in the service of capital, something abstract, in the Emoji movie, capital is personified in the character of Alex, the owner of the iPhone. The important bit is that this system of production is clearly tyrannical. The emojis themselves have no autonomy, and you'd think that a happy ending would involve the overthrowing of such a system, with emojis gaining control over their own lives. And yet, the entire ending serves to justify this tyrannical system. The only change that happens is that the evil emoji boss Smiler is overthrown, appealing to the common liberal notion that liberation can be achieved in the current system just so long as we change who is in charge. But everything else, the underlying relations of production, remain completely untouched. Only that now they have become even more totalizing, incorporating even the malfunctioning gene and the previously rebellious jailbreak into the system. The lack of autonomy, the class divisions, the reduction of individuals to cogs in the machine, subordinating them to a strict and unforgivable production plan, all of it is still there. I could add lots of general caveats to this video. First of all, there's clearly a lot of generalization going on here, which is somewhat inevitable when talking about culture as a whole. However, it should be noted that the concept of the culture industry was introduced by Adorno and Horkheimer in the early 40s, at a time when the American film industry was at an unprecedented level of monopolization. This gave mass media a kind of new unity and conformity. It could be argued that such generalizations are no longer appropriate in the age of the fragmented mass media given to us by the internet. However, we can still definitely see the patterns Adorno talks about in large industries like Hollywood. But I'd like to end by pointing out another thing that might be misunderstood. How does the theory of the culture industry differ from conspiracy theories, such as those of cultural Marxism? Well, Adorno points out that it's not simply individual intentions that produce the culture industry. Its causes are systematic. He says, although the author's motivations certainly enter the artifacts, they are by no means so all-determining as is often assumed. In most cases, the artist has to follow the objective requirements of his product much more than his own urges of expression when he translates his primary conception into artistic reality. Those who produce the material follow often grumblingly innumerable requirements, rules of thumb, set patterns, and mechanisms of controls which by necessity reduce to a minimum the range of any kind of artistic self-expression. So Adorno's thesis is not that there is some kind of elite evil cabal that is actively plotting to make culture worse, but that people are simply following their interests within the confines set up by the system of late capitalism. The cultural Marxist conspiracy theory encourages one to simply find a group of people one can identify as the villains, to scapegoat them, and then to attack them while fundamentally leaving everything unchanged. They're like the emojis who believe that Textopolis is now liberated because Smiley has been overthrown, even though everyone's position in the production process remains the same. Ironically, this tendency is encouraged by the culture industry itself. For mainstream movies to be immediately appealing, they must conform to certain patterns that are already familiar to viewers and reinforce those patterns, such as the pattern of the good collective and the evil invaders. The conspiracy theorists then extrapolate this pattern into the real world, to make an otherwise complicated world easily digested and understood. As Adorno says, the more opaque and complicated modern life becomes, the more people are tempted to cling desperately to cliches which seem to bring some order into the otherwise ununderstandable. Thus, people may not only lose true insight into reality, but ultimately their very capacity for life experience may be dulled by the constant wearing of blue and pink spectacles. In contrast to the simple-minded scapegoating of conspiracy theories, theorists like Adorno encourage people to not only be critical of the media they consume, but to look for the systematic causes behind it. If we want to fix systematic problems, we have to address systematic causes. If our only solution remains to merely overthrow Smiley, rather than the system that allows her to rise to power in the first place, then we will continue being Emoji's all-serving Alex, living at his mercy. And now I'd like to thank my patrons: Neo-Reactionary, Juke Slag, Noble Drew Thomas,
Butts,
M. Lim, E.V. Rosk, Ewix, Julian 2, Clark Fletcher, Spaghettisburg, Eric Goldman, Mark Kalpax, Todd Nett, A Pronounceable Name, Tendies123, Desan, Daniel Grimmer, Quantum Computation, Eric Coronado, Trevor Stevenson, Kelly Rankin, as well as all of these beautiful people. I am eternally grateful. As you might have noticed, I don't make videos as often as I used to. This is because I'm studying and I simply have less time. I'm sorry about that, but I will still try to make at least one video a month. If you become my patron for just $1, you'll get access to reading notes that I write for each video. I also just opened up a Google Drive folder where I will be uploading PDFs of the books and articles mentioned or recommended in my videos. I feel like after watching this video, a lot of people might be asking, just as they did on the Marxist analysis of Shrek, is this video serious or a joke? To which I answer, yes. I hope you have a nice day.